Okay, welcome everybody. Welcome back to the playing field for another special episode, this time with Mr. Steve Coleman. First of all, just want to thank everybody for their responses, their positive feedback and their comments so far around our previous episodes. And we'll certainly do our best to continue to bring you New Zealand-based content with coaches working in NZ, and it's certainly something that we're really passionate about. One person that I'm also really excited about working on the show today, Mr. Steve Coleman. So Steve, a funny coincidence. So we actually went to obviously the same university together, as we both know, a few years ago now. When after that did you come to New Zealand? When was the first year that you were around?
Firstly, thanks for having me, mate. It's a real pleasure to be here. You've done some good work so far with the guys that I've heard previously, so keep up the good work. But we obviously followed a very similar path, you and I, in terms of education and our journey to New Zealand. I finished university in 2007 in the July officially, but much earlier than that, of course, around exam time and stuff. And I arrived in New Zealand on October the 1st, 2007, ironically, to play a completely different sport in a completely different part of the world. But from that moment on, I was in and out of New Zealand, backwards and forwards between there and home, obviously, bouncing around. And 2010, I made the decision. Well, my wife actually made the decision for me that it was probably best to stay in the country if I wanted to still be in a relationship with her. So we made the decision that I'd stay in New Zealand, and the rest is history, I guess.
Nice, and I'm sure, as with many people that end up coming to New Zealand, they do stay, and it certainly worked out as a great decision for you, no doubt, personally and also professionally. And I think from a professional standpoint, there's some really cool things that I think a lot of other coaches who may have tread a similar journey to ourselves, but also may also be in NZ for a long time, which I think will be a real benefit. You mentioned that you came out to play another sport, so also that sport was cricket. How quickly after playing cricket did you get into your work at Rathgill College?
Well, I think I'd come over as a kind of what you'd term as an overseas professional cricketer, I guess. And I was working for a couple of clubs over here. And when we made the decision to stay, we applied for all the visas and all that kind of stuff. And then we had obviously the Christchurch earthquake. So I was sat in New Zealand for a winter with no visa, waiting for it to come through. And my wife said to me, "Why don't you go back and play football? You haven't played for a long time. Why don't you give that a go?" So I spent the winter of 2010 playing football for Wairarapa United in various different kind of capacities. And from there I got a job at the Rathgill in the January 2011 as soon as my visa came through. I had a phone call from a previous life and asked if I'd be interested in taking up a role there, and I did and ah, to be honest with you. I didn't really see myself getting into the education side of things and working in the school long term, but it was one of those moments where it kind of been linked to my first time here in New Zealand, so it was kind of a nice fit. So we decided that we'd move back up to the Wairarapa and take on the role. So from there it was a pretty much a roller coaster of lots of different things thrown in the deep end. Kind of managing multiple sports across the school, across the age groups, organising massive school events in the first instance, and I guess I got the role in the first place because of my links to the cricket and the football. But there was a lot of other stuff that came with it along the way, which is probably not the time to talk about that now. But it was a real cool experience along the way, and I'm sure we're going to talk more about that in your next kind of few questions, I guess.
I mean, certainly it presents quite a unique opportunity, given that you're in an educational setting. You go into a senior leadership role as director of sport. and then you've also got the opportunity to coach the football team. So, how quickly did the opportunity to coach the football team come around, and how much were you able to really dedicate to your time as a football coach during your time at Rathkill?
Yeah, I think the teaching itself, I guess, came much later, and I'm sure we're going to touch on that in a while. But in the first instance, I went in purely as the director of sport with some responsibilities around. I was basically head of football and head of cricket along the way, which took up a lot of my time. So I started there in the January, and obviously the school season in New Zealand, as most of your listeners will know, begins kind of early May. So by the time we got term one out of the way, I was pretty much straight into it. And to be honest with you, in the first instance, as people will know in this country, football is a second class citizen in a lot of certainly provincial towns where rugby is king. And when I kind of organised the whole trials and go through the process of getting that kind of set up, it was very much right, is this what we're dealing with? We had 50 odd football players, and it was very much one or two players could play a little bit, and the rest were playing because they didn't really want to play the rugby or whatever else. So it was a pretty inconspicuous start to my coaching career, I guess you'd describe it. But across the 5 years, I made a pretty bold statement to the headmaster that we'd make a national tournament in 5 years' time, and he kind of raised his eyebrows and said, "Well, yeah, good luck with that. We'll see how we go." And off we went. So to begin with, it was pretty much one man and his dog. One parent, and their Labrador would turn up on a Saturday morning and watch us play in the lower divisions of Wellington school football. And to be honest with you, it gave me a really good opportunity, mate, to work away at something obviously I was passionate about in the first instance. That's why you get into it, and learn on the job and as we go without any pressures of winning or losing. There'll be more of that story a bit later on, but I guess the first instance was all about trying to work out how the game was run, how it's managed, and trying to find the way of myself as a young guy. I was only 23, 24 then, kind of developing my way of doing things. And obviously along the way, managing people, you've got, I guess the best way to describe it is non-football people giving you lots of advice, and you have to learn who to listen to and who's relevant and who's not. But yeah, certainly the behind closed doors, working in the shadows, without anybody really paying much attention, was a real bonus for me in my own development from there, really.
I can imagine for a lot of people, the need to be recognised so early on is sometimes a cause for concern. But you certainly seemed comfortable in knowing that whilst there might not have been a lot of eyes directly on you, that was still a really valuable time for you to practice particular things. Is there anything else you'd like to add or expand on that you think to other people that that's a real benefit to them? Working in the shadows, if you like, and kind of working away at things without necessarily feeling the need to be justified immediately.
Yeah, I think it's really important that everyone has their own journey, right? So people in this country working in the game, and myself included, you get very lucky sometimes where you get opportunities to do things because you know somebody who knows someone, or you can move forwards in the game pretty quickly if people think you're doing a good job. And because of that, you end up with this mentality where if you're not where you think you should be, you're failing or you're behind. Whereas for me, I think there's a very big chance for people to work away at something without the pressures of having to win or having to be answerable to people or whatever the specific differences or problems that people face in football in general are. And I've said to lots of people who ask, what my journey was, it's the best opportunity that I could have to learn. And as I linked kind of my coaching journey through the kind of New Zealand football pathway and kind of all of that stuff, it coincided with obviously the bigger success in terms of winning that the team had, and by the end of my time at Rathkill, I'd often say to people, it's great to see you here, fantastic to have you, but you guys weren't here at the start, and it was very much a loyalty to the people that were with us on the journey all the way through. And we did make that national tournament side, and we've had some good success in terms of developing individuals out of that group as well. But yeah, the opportunity to work away methodically at something and trial and error is a big one as well. People don't often get a lot of opportunities to try things and hope that they go well and fix them if they don't. And yeah, it was a real great learning opportunity for me, and I'm very grateful for the chance that I had, really, to be honest with you.
So concurrently, you had the opportunity to coach on a regular basis, and you then obviously were teaching on a regular basis. What do you think some of the main things from your teaching background, or how you were taught as a teacher, that you really think stand you in good stead when you're then coaching young footballers? What were the biggest transfers?
I think the teaching came about as a bit of an accident, really. I basically helped develop a program in our younger school, year 9 and 10, around, I guess, for want of a better phrase, streaming our more talented sportsmen out of the mainstream PE program and into something that they would find far more beneficial. So in terms of that process, it was about developing a program that wasn't really necessarily just about them improving as their own particular sport, because obviously it encompassed three different codes across the board in the winter and 2 in the summer. But it was more about the holistic education around the nutrition, the physical side of the game, and also a lot of stuff off the field around obviously drugs in sport and the pitfalls and challenges that young sportsmen face. So it was a really beneficial experience in terms of setting up something new, something that was a point of difference for our school. In terms of the differences or the things that were a crossover, I guess working with the individual was the big thing. We were lucky, a school of 300 boys. You were very much in a situation where you were dealing with a small group on a regular basis, and you get to know the person a lot quicker. And I found that finding the best ways to get things out of each individual boy was very different based on their own needs and what they were after. And obviously there was young men within that group who had their own challenges and stuff, and working out the best way to help them achieve their potential, I think was a real learning experience for me, and that was able to be transferred across the pitch onto the grass as well. So yeah, I guess it was a bit of an accident I ended up teaching, but it stood me in good stead for the coaching world moving forward, for sure.
I mean, well, as you say, Steve, there was a lot of work in the shadows, if you like. You obviously earned enough of a reputation to then get called upon by the New Zealand secondary schools. Can you maybe give us a bit of an update on kind of how that came about, and then subsequently, how many contacts or tours, or what did the New Zealand secondary schools commitment look like?
Yeah, I guess that came at the end, or towards the end of my time at Rathkill, and it kind of overlapped with me leaving the school. Actually, in the end, it came about, I guess, half because of some of the work we were doing at the school, and we were starting to get a lot more recognition around the local region. In the Wellington competition, we were certainly up there with the more established schools in the competitions. And then obviously the time we spent at national tournaments, we'd won a national competition, schoolboy competition in 2016, and people started to recognise that there was something happening at this little country school in the middle of central New Zealand. So I guess we'd started to put ourselves on the map a little bit, not just myself, but the players as well. There was a lot of players coming through that program that were all of a sudden involved in national talent centres and national youth league sides, which we'd never had before, and also trying to manage that process with the school in terms of the boys different commitments and the challenge with the work-life balance was obviously one aspect of that. And then I spent some time with Danny Hay on an A license that obviously spent some time with you on as well, and Danny actually had done the job previous to me, and had obviously led that into his under-17 role with the national governing body, and he'd actually recommended me to the board around a possible option to take over from the departing coach, and had a interview in Wellington and was successful in getting that job. It's obviously a pretty good and cool opportunity for me to get some recognition at a national level. Obviously, it's not the top end of the national level, and the challenges around getting the best players into that group is an ongoing one for the organisation. But I was lucky to have two opportunities. So I took an under-19 group to the US, to LA and San Francisco in 2018, and then in July 2019, I also took the under-19 group to Australia, to New South Wales. We played Australia schools, New South Wales schools along the way. So really good opportunity to experience international football, work in a compressed environment around camp. You know, I'd heard some stories in the lead up to getting the job around people picking teams, turning up at the airport, meeting everyone, and off they went to wherever they were going around the world. And I certainly didn't want that to be my experience. I wanted it to be an experience where I could take stuff away from it and learn from those experiences. So setting up a process around trials, camps, having camps pre-tour, pre-travel, and just trying to mirror as much as I could what I thought the national teams, the age group sides would do in that situation. Obviously, with limited budget and resources was always going to be challenging, but I think we made some really good ground, and we certainly took a pretty strong team to the US in 2018 and did well over there against some US MLS academies. We drew with the Galaxy, we beat San Jose Earthquakes, and for me, again, it was a learning opportunity to work away at a process of having a short period of time with a bunch of players and trying to instill a playing style and principles into that side as quickly and as efficiently as we could, really.
You mentioned there that there's obviously a limit in time, and given that they are more camp-based or tour-based international experiences, what would have been some of your priorities, working with those young players to make sure that when they were away, that they were as prepared as possible? What can you recall as being the main areas that you focused on as a coach?
I guess we changed the process from the first tour to the second tour in terms of the lead up. I would say the second tour, there was a lot more opportunity to work with the group around how we wanted them to play. The first tour had its challenges. The US was obviously a massive change in culture and the way things are done over there. So we had some challenges, certainly while we were over there, for sure. But with the limited time, for me, for the team to be successful, and by successful I mean from a player's perspective to do well in games and be competitive, they have to be built on a strong organisation of the team and the way they operate, mainly without the ball to begin with, to make sure they were difficult to beat. And what I try to do is mirror as much of the New Zealand football kind of playing style, curriculum, and the mantras around Kiwi values and mentality, and the difficulty for the players to understand exactly what those things were. And when you boil that back, it comes down to the hard working, I guess, blue collar style mentality of the country. And when you've got a widespread group from north to south in your squad, you have to try and gel that together as quickly as you can. So yeah, we spent some time getting people to understand it was important. A lot of players had come through that program. A lot of international footballers had come through that program. And certainly when I went away in 2019, we had Chad Coombs with us, who'd been, obviously he's an all white, but he'd come through the system at secondary schools as well. So that was a really good opportunity to give the players an insight to exactly what it meant to be part of that program and what it meant to play for your country. So yeah, those are the big things, I guess, from a football perspective, making the team difficult to beat, but also unlocking why people were there and what their motivation was to be there.
So at this point, Steve, had you transitioned into working full-time in football? You mentioned there was an overlap. What was the kind of time frame between director of sport and New Zealand secondary schools in international experience, and then time?
Yeah, good. It's a good question. I guess that's where the lines can become a little bit blurry. I guess in this country, as everyone knows, there aren't that many full-time, jobs in the game. Certainly where I'm based in the country, it's not a lot of full-time jobs. So I spent 2 years at Lower Hutt at the back end of my time at Rathkeale, where I coached the Lower Hutt side in the Central League, and was transitioning towards that becoming a more full-time job. But for those 2 years, it was, pretty tough. I did 2 years before that at Warrapper as an assistant as well. And your school day starts at 7:30 in the morning, and your full day finishes at 10:30 at night. When I was at Lower Hutt, getting in from training on a Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday nights, and you certainly make a lot of sacrifices in your personal life and your family life to make those things happen. And I guess I reached a point where it couldn't continue. Certainly, my wife, bless her, is very supportive of everything that we do, and she certainly allowed those things to happen. And being away at weekends, Rathkill game in the morning, travelling to Wellington, and then back in the afternoon for a Lower Hutt game, and getting in at 9-10 o'clock on a Saturday night, and not really having much of a break all the way through is a difficult one. So I always chuckle when people say to me, you haven't worked in full-time football for very long. It's absolutely true, but there are people won't realise, and I'm sure there's so many examples of this around the country as well, as I know that people will be working a full-time job, then often training, and sacrificing their time and away from family and stuff to get involved. So it's a really difficult time. So at the end of 2017, I made the decision that I would leave Rathkill. We'd probably reached a natural endpoint with the football. We'd probably taken the program as far as we could at that point. A lot of our best kind of crop of players had moved on and graduated from the school, and the school was going through a bit of a transitional phase in terms of the sport and the direction it wanted to take things. So it was time for me to move on. So I sat in the kind of December window there, and with a few options up my sleeve, and I was very lucky to have from Paul Temple at the Wellington Phoenix, and I'd done some work with him through the summer on a voluntary position actually in the youth league with his side at the club there, and he rang and said, would I be interested in taking a role with the club starting in early 2017. So jumped to the opportunity. Very lucky to be involved in the only professional football club in the country, and really happy to take that opportunity on. So that was my 2017 move into full-time football.
And with that move into maybe not say full-time in terms of the amount of hours we're committing to it, but the dedication to one job. I mean, did that sharpen your focus at all? Knowing that you'd had all this additional responsibility around all these different organisations, and you were then able to focus on one. Like, did you feel that you're still able to do that, or did you still feel there were distractions and from other areas?
I think there's always a lot of noise around what you do. In that first year at the Phoenix, I was also still working with Lower Hutt. I was only coaching I was coaching the under-15 side at the Phoenix in the first instance. So my job coaching Lower Hutt could continue in the Central League, which was a nice opportunity for me to continue. And one actually I fought hard to keep, because I wanted the opportunity to still work in that senior side of the game and again groove my work at the next level up, which was important to me. And so I guess there was still that noise, but I'd gone from doing maybe 3 or 4 different things to only doing 2, which was a nice change. Certainly my email inbox was a lot emptier than it was during my time at Rathkill, and you start to fill your days with a lot more things that you want to do and you want to focus on, and all of a sudden football became a larger part of my day than it had been, which was always the way I wanted things to go, really. So starting to groove what I was doing, and again the 15s job at the Phoenix allowed me to kind of continue to work on my craft and how I coach, as opposed to what I was coaching at that point as well.
So you're then thrust into an environment where you've got young aspirational players, in like you said, the only professional club in the country. How did that raise your game in terms of your standards, your expectations, knowing that these players either want to play in the A League in a few years' time or want to head overseas? What was the impact on you?
That's a good question. I think when you come from a regional setup, you have an opinion of your environment and the players within your environment, of where they're at based on what you see in front of you and your competitions you're playing in, or the people you come across on a weekly basis. And when you move into an organisation like that, and I'd done some work at obviously National Talent Centre, which would kind of transitioned me into that process, you get a greater understanding of what the level is required to play at the next level up. And obviously, I'd come through youth teams in the UK and stuff at home, but when you're away from the game for a while, you forget, I think, sometimes the level that's required to succeed, and not just the level of quality from the player, because I think that's got a lot better in the country in my time here for sure, technically, but the level of input required to succeed in terms of the commitment to training, the commitment to your craft, and that was a big change moving in there. And obviously the players are best with best a lot of the time in those younger age groups, and we worked really hard. Paul's done a fantastic job to get that academy up to the level where it is now. Obviously, we had some challenges in my first year there from a club perspective, which impacted on our work in the academy and what we could do. But the challenge is always improving the players that you have in front of you. And I think that's been always the craft moving forwards.
And you then took a bulk of those players into the National Youth League. How many seasons were in the National Youth League? First of all, as a coach, but then with this group of young Knicks players.
So I guess one of my first coaching roles out in the big bad world was I worked as an assistant at Team Wellington in 2014 with Tim Bush, a friend of mine who asked whether I'd come in. I was still playing at that point and asked me if I could come in and be his assistant, which was a great opportunity. To be honest, I didn't do a lot of coaching that first year. I was pretty raw and pretty green at that point. So I spent a lot of time observing what was happening. And towards the end of the year, I did get involved a little bit more in terms of delivering larger parts of sessions and stuff. But it was a fantastic opportunity to be involved at the next level up. And then after that, with the association with Rathkill and Wipe United, I worked with Heartland Warrapper. Paul Arthur was the head coach. I was the assistant. We had a difficult time of it. We lost the first 5 games in the season and had a real kind of search inside ourselves to find out whether it was really important to us to help the players improve. And we did a much better job the second half of the season in terms of managing expectations, but also making the team more competitive. So we kind of had a bit of a different kind of outcome there in terms of Team Wellington was much more focused on trying to win games and being at the top of the table. Warrapper was a little bit different. We had a lot of local lads. There was a big push to have local players involved. And obviously moving to the Phoenix, everyone expects the Phoenix to win, but the realities of what we're trying to do and what our end goals are very different. So I think one of the biggest things is trying to manage your own ego at that point as well and put that to one side. And you have to understand that the player comes first and it's about their development rather than the end result. Obviously, the objective is always to win. The objective is always to try and win the game and do what you can to make that happen. But the reality is the competition serves a purpose for the players at that moment of their development. And I don't think many people outside of our organisation have a true understanding of what exactly that means to us along that journey. So, yeah, ego to one side, winning not so important. Is a real learning curve from my perspective.
And I guess how in that situation, then obviously you've got a varying degree of success that you measure, the National Youth League by with those young players. Were there any key things that you had to do to make sure the players understood that was the barometer of success? Like, was there much convincing or buy-in or culture building needed around ensuring that as a coach in the National Youth League and as a player in the National Youth League that your success criteria was similar?
What about that I've worked with in the Youth League or just at the Phoenix?
A bit of both. I mean, whatever you would think would give the biggest sense of, this is what success in the National Youth League looks like, and this is how it helps us when we're working with our young footballers.
Yeah, I guess the 2 biggest learning moments for me as a coach are from the Heartland Warrapper season where you had no points from 5 games and you're desperately going back through the game tapes to look at how you conceded this goal and that goal, and what players could do, but also around the expectations and the standard of the product you're trying to deliver to the players. And I think it was probably a success story of process at that point. Paul and I were both on the NZF coaching pathway and trying desperately to do the right things by the players, but also manage expectations in the local region. There was a lot of buy-in from the local region, so we had to manage expectations there. But also in the last 6 games, I think we ended up with 8 or 9 points without remembering too closely. We got a point against Auckland City. Jose Figueira coached Auckland City side, which is a really big marker of success for the team from a playing perspective, but also from my perspective, success of outcome and process around the coaching, professional coach model, and game day to game day, and improving that situation. And then at the Phoenix, I think the managing expectations of the players is a little bit easier. I think that they understand that it's all part of their development. Obviously, the young player always wants to try and win. They're very competitive in our environment, and that's just the nature of trying to get to the top in their respective fields. But the management of the expectations and the program there is a little bit easier because it's seen as the next step of their own development. So you move from out of the winter season into the summer season, and it's the next step of your progression. And a lot of those boys, for them, is the next step is the National League, and they want to progress into there. So good performances individually in that environment in the youth league allows that opportunity to manifest itself. So I think managing that sort of things is a little bit easier in that environment for sure.
And being around in that full-time environment, I'm sure there's access to other parts of the club, and you're obviously surrounded by some really great people that work at the organisation. At what point then have you started to kind of work within other areas of the academy or the first team? I mean, has there been a progression along into first team affairs, or have you kind of stuck predominantly in the youth department?
I think in my first year at the club, we obviously lost a coach halfway through the season, and you kind of everyone feels the ripple effect within the club from that perspective. And within probably 10 to 12 weeks of being at the club and coaching the under-15s, I was coaching on a caretaker position in the National League, and having to fly to Auckland to play Auckland City live on Sky Sports. And you're certainly thrown in the deep end at that perspective, which was a very good but difficult learning curve at the same time, and trying to manage and navigate our way through that situation was, from a whole club perspective, a real challenge. And then obviously, as my time with the club's gone on, I've been really fortunate this year that the first team were looking for people to help from a first team perspective with the analysis side of the game. It's something that I've had in my skill set for a little while now, just because as everyone knows in this country, you tend to work alone a lot of the time, and if you don't do it yourself, you haven't got anyone to do it. So yeah, I got an opportunity to work in the first team under Giancarlo Italiano, the assistant and head analyst, and it's been really beneficial to see the next level up of football and be involved in that environment day to day. It's been a real beneficial opportunity for me, and a real learning opportunity as well at the same time.
And that's obviously meant that you've had experience across both those youth players, into some of the more senior players. What in your opinion is the biggest thing that young players have got to do to make the jump from being, say, in the National Youth League up into the first team environment, or even close to being near the first team environment?
I think being in the right place at the right time is sometimes a good place to start. You take someone like Libby Kakache, obviously, who's come through our academy from pretty much the start of the journey all the way into the first team. And the guys, Screeny and Paul, gave him an opportunity in that season during their time in charge, and he's flourished at that point. So there's certainly an element of right place, right time. But I think the work that you put in to to close the gap on people in front of you in your position, understanding your role within the team, and doing whatever you can from a technical basis to make those positions your own, and bridge that gap. I think as soon as you end up at the next level up, naturally the players adapt, and the pace of the game is obviously the biggest change, from certainly one age group to the next, and to the next, as I've seen over the last 2 or 3 years. The speed of the game and the speed of the players' thought process is so much quicker at the higher up the levels you go in our academy. So once you're immersed in that, your technique will always take care of you. So if that's in a good place and it's in good working order, you'll be okay. And then, adapting to the pace, and the intensity there is the next kind of learning curve for those boys. But closing the gap individually, in your position, technically, tactically, and also mentally is the big challenge for the players.
I mean, it seems at this point, Steve, that you've had obviously leadership experience, director of sport, been involved in teaching. You've got international experience. You're then going to full-time football and youth and seniors. I mean, when I know it's hard to reflect sometimes, back on from when you arrived, but was that diversity in your experiences a deliberate plot, or was it more so, the circumstances that you find yourself in, given the area of the country that you live in? I mean, have you ever given any thoughts around how deliberate that was, or is it, has it been a bit more, fortuitous than that?
I guess a little bit of both. I think if you have the mindset that you're trying to upskill yourself in whatever aspect of the game or the environment that interests you, while you're filling gaps for people, then you can do some good work, and you can create some great learning moments for yourself. And I guess the thirst to be involved and progress and learn, all the way through not just my football and coaching life, but all the way through my journey, I guess, has led me to that point. There's a real desire that I have to not waste whatever small amount of talent that I have, for my job. And I think you have to be able to put your own ego to one side and say, look, I'm here to help, and by helping you, I'm learning myself. And I think if you can do that, and you're happy to be that person, then I think you can create some excellent opportunities along the way. And I did the secondary schools job, for example, as a volunteer position. It's for the nature of the organisation that it is. But if you don't take those opportunities where it's time consuming and there's a lot of stuff to deal with and noise around it, if you don't take those opportunities, then you don't get the experiences. And in this country, there's loads of opportunities that you can take, but it's not all about earning money. The game doesn't have the money in this country to earn big bucks, so you have to be prepared to do what you need to do to get what you need out of it.
Nice. And if you align that then with things that potentially you're looking into in terms of your interests and things that you're learning, what are some of the ways at the moment that you're continuing to develop yourself as a sports person?
I guess the first one is, we took a Phoenix group to New Caledonia in December, playing an international under-15 tournament. New Caledonia is a French-speaking country. You realise very quickly that the world's a lot bigger than the bottom of the North Island in New Zealand, and learning languages and branching out to other areas is really, really important in terms of where the game may take you in the future. So learning new languages is certainly on the list, and a real, I wouldn't say passion, but an important piece of the puzzle to create opportunities in the future. And I also think there's a point in your career where you have enough experience to create confidence in what you do, and that knowledge and experience gives you the ability to understand what creates a point of difference for you as an individual. And at that point, you have to decide if you're prepared to continue with that point of difference enough that doors will open for you in the future. And for me, those points of differences are around kind of the hybrid nature of the game these days. So the analysis side of things, like I spoke about earlier, and linking that in with my coaching is I guess a point of difference for me. And being able to work around the software that's required for the analysis side of things, and the huddle and the sports code and all of those things, having a working knowledge of those, coupled with the coaching, and also being able to deliver on whatever the analysis side of things is thrown up, I guess becomes my point of difference moving forwards. And in the future, if that creates opportunities for me, then great. And if it doesn't, then at least I've learned new skills and develop new things to my game that will help me in the future.
Nice. And it certainly seems that you do put a lot of thought into this, and I'm really appreciative of the time, Steve, that you've taken to share this. From the experiences when you did first arrived to this point. I think it's a really unique story, and it's certainly why I was keen to get you onto the playing field today, and certainly share with others some of the things that they may could consider that they haven't just yet. And I think you made a really good point to illustrate that obviously the game, that often you need to have multiple roles and you need to have multiple strings to your bow, if you like. And I think you're a prime example of someone that's taken the initiative and done that. So just want to thank you again, Steve, for your time on the playing field.
No, thanks very much for your time, mate. I think it's a real quality thing that you're trying to do here. Help people around the country get to know people, learn, and create opportunities for people. I think it's a real good thing you're doing. So thanks very much for having me, and I really appreciate it.
Thank you. And for those listening, we'll certainly get Steve back onto the playing field again in the future. And we certainly encourage you to keep in touch in the meantime, and make sure that you send in any questions or suggestions or comments. But from me, again, thank you for listening. Thank you for tuning in, and we'll see you all on the side of the playing field again soon.